You know, it's funny when you look back at things that happened a couple of months prior, like this, for example, Nicola Thinlips issuing a Black Lives Matter solidarity message, and of course this was in the wake of George Fentanyl Floyd, and everybody was sympathising because it was so racist, etc. It's not the first time that Nicola Sturgeon has come out and, you know, pandered to the minorities of this world and implies that Scotland is inherently racist, etc. We need to right the wrongs of the past. Her tweet here going on to say that if you can only be tall because somebody is on their knees, then you have a serious problem. The words of the late great Toni Morrison. Racism is an evil that none of our societies can claim to be immune from, but we must stand and eradicate it. Hashtag Black Lives Matter. And in such times, she's many a podium speech where she's given the big I am about suppressing the deadly virus. She has come out and shown support for BLM, going so far as to endorse in the Parliament suggestions for Scottish people sending their money to bail out these rioters. She had the audacity to call them peaceful protests. On multiple occasions she's done this. The evil white man of America is the problem, and the evil white man everywhere is the problem to Nicola Sturgeon and her cronies. Diversity, inclusion, progression, anti-racism, the LGBT emphasis on the T, etc. All things that she endorses. And sorry, there's a helicopter flying right over my house, huh? Yeah, that's pretty loud, like. So the reason that I'm bringing this up is, you know, we know the direction of travel that Scotland's headed in terms of the BLM, anti-racist update to our education. And that's what I was kind of trying to see if there had been any updates to date, and I can't find very much, granted, but I did come across something that's very interesting, and it's one of many examples. This was from a few months ago. I was on the EIS, which is the biggest teaching union in Scotland, and of course I've gone through this before. They've got many a thing here. They've got gender equality, which is feminism, of course, the LGBT emphasis on the T, you know, that gender, that tranny stuff, etc. And they've updated this, because once, about a year ago, it just used to say anti-racism. Now it's BAME as well. But it says, of course, if you come through this all, some of the things that they've got, you know, anti-racist education, we've got challenging anti-Muslim prejudice, new anti-racist education resources, which hasn't really been updated, teachers turning the tide, celebrating Black History Month, show racism the red card, myths of immigration, which is cancer, I've been through that before. Of course, we've got Holocaust education and learning never to forget, you know. And then I went on to their journal, because this website has its own magazine / journal type thing. And just scrolling through some of it, I've posted this before on Telegram, but I had another look at it today. You know, some of the things included the main features. It says Black Lives Matter in Scotland and taking pride in teaching 20 years since the repeal of Section 28 with a homosexual flag in front of you, of course. So I went on to the Black Lives Matter page, and of course it's the proverbial dribble that we've all come to expect. You know, they take things out of context, they lie and they manipulate narratives, they still play into narratives that have since been debunked. But I was scrolling through some of this, and it was just that this, for example, the way forward for race equality in a racist society is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. Over the last month, we have seen Black Lives Matter statements promoted everywhere, from big brands and commercial businesses to community activists. But they're still oppressed. They're still oppressed. Of course they are. We must do more. Of course. Talat Yacoub, right? And that's the woman who I've made several videos on in the past. The one that stood in our parliament and told white women to step aside. She runs the 50-50 programme that calls for at least 50-50 representation, but simultaneously wants to push in brown and black MPs into the parliament because they're brown or black, hence me saying white women step aside. Scottish Equality Consultant campaigner writes in Bella Caledonia about the dangers of performative solidarity and empty rhetoric. Yeah, because it's not enough that the businesses pander to your stupendous demands, they have to act upon them. This is not the time to hastily book some training sessions to appear proactive. This is the time to think more deeply and take steps towards systemic change off the back of Fentanyl Floyd. But this is where it gets interesting, but this bit here. A more inclusive education. Oh, I love this bit though. Many groups also call for white allyship that is reflective, deliberate and sustained. Fuck you and fuck yourself. Across the UK, groups are organising to call for an anti-racist education experience and a more diverse curriculum, ensuring that BEME experiences are included, and not just in history lessons, but integrated across the board. In Scotland, the campaign Reparation in Education recently wrote an open letter to First Minister Sustainable Thinlip Sturgeon and Education Secretary Dickhead John Swinney with 3 simplistic demands, which... compulsory inclusion across the curriculum of BEME experiences and source materials by BEME authors, diversify teaching staff and leadership, inclusion of racial awareness training for all education degrees, and continuous up-to-date training for already qualified teachers/lecturers. Madeline and Ruben Joseph from the Reparation in Education campaign told the EIS, "We have tried to identify 3 areas in which we believe the education system fails its brown and black students, not the white, the ethnic Scottish students in this case. No. Fails the students that they want to benefit. We hope, the implementation of these lead to better experiences for ethnically Scottish and non-ethnically Scottish students alike." Madeline Joseph, and do not be fooled by that name. Oh, that's Madeline Joseph. What a shock. But this isn't the only type of thing that we see, which I will come on to this letter in full in a second. You know, there is a plethora of anti-racist resources, anti-white, by the way, you know, trying to quell the wrongs of racism. We've got Black Lives Matter at school talking about race, the black curriculum, the anti-racist educator, which is by far the fucking worst, the absolute worst. It is celebrating difference, exploiting stereotypes and anti-racism. You know, one here, for example, is called Colourful Heritage. You know, it's education packs for schools in Glasgow, and you know the big spiel here. But I love this bit. It also illustrates Scotland's South Asian contribution to entrepreneurship, political participation, and Glasgow's multicultural history, as well as South Asian migration and how their identity is being shaped. Glasgow's multicultural history. This is what they want to teach to primary school children. You know, it's just unbelievable. Of course, we've got SIR. This is another one that does this BS. You know, they've got minority ethnic communities and housing, yada yada, addressing inclusion, effectively challenging racism in Scottish schools, racist incident reporting in Scottish schools, BEME teachers in Scotland, you know, and they're constantly hammering the government with demands and letters, etc., to, you know, act upon what they claim is the perils of racism. But this one here, addressing inclusion in Scottish schools, I have been over this before, but if you come down here and you get to I'm not entirely sure if it's their glossary. I have showed this before, but just so you get the picture of what they are, what they believe, and what they wish for schools to undertake. This is their ideology, and this is becoming the prominent ideology across the whole of Scotland at this point. You know, hidden bias. This is the terminology. Hidden bias, a prejudice that is not outwardly deliberate and nonetheless affects attitudes and behaviours, occurs because the person responsible has not consciously understood or acknowledged how stereotypes affect their own perceptions and actions. So we're the problem again. Ethnocentrism, a tendency to believe that your own ethnic group and its cultural beliefs, traditions and practices are of central importance, and to make judgmental assumptions about other ethnic groups based on that belief. You know, but then we get to this bit. This is where it gets juicy. Intersectionality, white privilege, microaggressions, race/racial. The concept of a racial group is derived and outdated because race doesn't exist. Hence anti-racism, which is anti-white. So, anyway, this is their wee letter here. And it says, the letter is being drafted by a diverse group, of course, because if it wasn't diverse, then it wouldn't be up to par, of course, many of whom have directly suffered the consequences of the failures of our education system. The events of the past 2 weeks have caused many people across the world to examine the state of race relations in their own countries. Now, bear in mind, this is a couple of months prior. This is, again, on the back of George Floyd. It's just constant, relentless BS. Many have finally opened their eyes to the harsh reality of Scotland's role in the transatlantic slave trade. And they keep doing this. How many times have I made videos on this subject where it's the same script each and every time, where they try to imply that Scottish people don't believe racism exists here, you know, but it does, because they want you to think that it does. But then they go on to talk about how we don't get taught about our past, we're ignorant to our past, and they're going to step in and they're going to tell you about all the things that Whitey did wrong in the past, you know? It's consistent BS pattern from these people. Oh, we're only finally opening our eyes because George Floyd died in America. Now we're talking about Scotland's role in the transatlantic slave trade. But we don't talk about some modern day slavery. We don't talk about the fact that whites were enslaved themselves at some point. We couldn't even talk about the fact that Scots themselves were enslaved, some, mainly Jacobites if my history is correct on that front. And they were sent to America. We don't talk about Africans selling Africans into slavery. We don't talk about the Barbary slave trade. No, we don't talk about any of these things. Every group at some point in history has been enslaved in some shape or form. You know, we don't even talk about the Chinese slaves, you know, working for threepence, Chinese children and that. And of course, we need to talk about the poor little blacks that were sent across the world at the hands of Whitey and the small hats. While not often discussed, the repercussions are still viscerally felt. Of course they are, because you never shut up about it. These issues run deeper than simply acknowledging the historical context. We believe an extensive examination and remodel of our education system is required to address and correct Scotland's role in the continuing racism which pervades Scottish culture and social life. Again, there's this inferiority complex. Is it that, or is it the fact that you have an ideology that is explicitly anti-white? I don't know. Maybe it's both. We have devised 3 objectives, the implementation of which ought to be seriously considered. We strongly believe that had these existed before now, they would have seriously benefited our personal experiences in school. Oh, your personal experiences in school. We hope that their implementation will facilitate a better experience for current and future BEME people in Scotland. Oh, great, more future BEME people in Scotland, eh? Oh, Jesus, man. So it says down here, the curriculum for black excellence. What about white excellence? We can't have that though. No, we can't. Only recently has Scotland's prolific involvement in the slave trade come to the forefront of our nation's consciousness. It's not our nation. You happen to live in my nation. I'm sorry, but that's how I see it. It's not your nation at all. It's my nation. My ancestors' nation. My ancestors built this nation. You happen to be a resident in my nation. However, it is not enough to address this in a history class alone. The ongoing pressures faced by minorities highlights the need for a deeper cross-curriculum broad general education, drawing upon the aims of the existing curriculum for excellence, a focus on the social, political and historical context of BEME experiences, because that's what matters. BEME experiences, should be essential to our learning. This can be achieved through the explicit teaching of minority experiences, as well as an increased inclusion of materials by BEME creatives and academics across the entire curriculum. But again, no, it would be a specific type of BEME creative and or academic. Because these people want to shove in BEME candidates into the parliament, BEME teachers, they want to shove in BEME creatives and or academics into materials and call it inclusion, but they have to be a specific type. They have to share the same worldview, which is anti-racist. They're not going to have some black guy, some black academic who thinks that racism doesn't exist. They're not going to have some black guy that thinks that homogeneity is the way to go forward. You're not going to have some black guy that advocates for Scottish people to remain a majority in their own homeland. No, you're not. You're going to have black guys and black women in there who are going to talk about the exact opposites. We urge that the Rainbow Unicorn government makes this a compulsory element of students' learning. Then they want to diversify representation of teaching staff and leadership. A good educator should be a role model in a young person's life. However, there is an unmistakable absence of BEME representation amongst teaching staff in Scotland. But if a good educator is a good educator, then surely their skin colour should not matter, their race, their ethnicity should not matter. If they're a good educator, that should be all that matters. So you've negated your own argument at this point. Your problem is there's too many white teachers, but you won't just come right out and say it. It has to be formulated with some dribble, like underrepresentation. Despite BEME individuals making up 4% of the Scottish population, only 1% of primary and 1.7% of secondary educators are from BEME groups. So there has to be at least 4% of teachers have to be from BEME backgrounds, because 4% at the time of the 2011 census, 4% of the population was BEME. Now, I've said that I keep forgetting to bring this up every time I talk about this subject, but as that percentage increases by this logic, that would then suggest that the amount of teachers or politicians, etc., CEOs, police, etc. They all have to match the percentage. So as they become a bigger and bigger percentage of the population, say for example they became 15% of the population, then it needs to be 15% of the teaching profession needs to match that. 15% of the police force needs to match that. 15% of Parliament needs to match that. And as the ethnically Scottish population decreases in size to make way for the larger BEME population size, we decrease in numbers in the police force. We decrease. You see how this is a power shift? This is a power grab, masked under the guise of representation. Anyway, not only do members show a 65% of underrepresentation, but there appears to be an attitude which contributes to the marginalisation of BEME educators. That's in your head. BEME teachers are often expected to leave their identity at home. Minorities feel pressurised out of the system, which could be one of the reasons as to why only 0.6 of promoted positions are made up by minority individuals. Well, there's such a tiny fraction of the teaching profession, you've just said that. Hence, the likelihood of them being promoted is even slimmer, because promotions tend to happen every day, and if there's less of them in the teaching profession, stands to reason there's going to be less promotions. So we have to promote them more in order for there to be a rectified racism, sorry. But again, you should be leaving your identity at the door. We don't want some Christian preacher teaching a bunch of children, and we don't want some Muslim coming in to talk about anti-racism, or a black coming in to talk about anti-racism. You live in Scotland. It's our system created by our people. But this multicultural bullshit wants to dismantle that to make these people feel included. Hence inclusion. The problem is you live in a country that's not your own. And that is literally the problem. You don't fit in. And instead of accepting that and trying to fit in, you want to destroy things and change it to rebuild it in an image that fits you, or where you can fit in. But of course, it's racist. Everything's racist. Then it says, there is no question that Scotland is a majority ethnically Scottish. I'm not playing this bullshit anymore. I'm not white. White is an umbrella term. People need to realise this. If you're English, you're ethnically English. If you're you're ethnically Welsh, Irish. You're not white. White is an umbrella term. This is what they're doing. Because the white opens the door to black Scottish. We're not a white country. We're ethnically Scottish. They're eradicating your claim to your own land. That's what they're doing. There is no question that Scotland is a majority ethnically Scottish country, which often exacerbates the isolation period experienced by many minorities. Well, what do you expect when you move to a white country, or an ethnically Scottish country, sorry? We ask that the importance of having role models who look like you or have shared experiences is not underestimated by your government. But again, we keep going down this road, because just because Scotland is majority ethnically Scottish, you're assuming that white teachers are role models to white children. It's not how it works. We don't see it that way. Maybe we should. Maybe there's a disconnect there. A disconnect that we've been taught over the years to ignore. Whereas they don't have that same disconnect. They've got their in-group preference. We've been taught not to have it anymore. That's what this is about. Through the use of effective incentives and other measures, we demand an increase in the diversity of teaching and leadership staff in every school across the country. Educate our educators. Before drafting this letter, we contacted a wide range of teaching staff and students. From our research, it's clear that racial awareness in the classroom is a secondary consideration. Education students unanimously informed us that there was no compulsory racial awareness element to their courses. This forces many new teachers to tackle racism for the first time inside the classroom itself, without any guidance as to appropriately deal with such incidents. Well, no elaboration here. What are you talking about racism? Are we talking about microaggressions? Are we talking about the Pete looked at Abdul funny? What are you talking about? It's not the fucking teacher's job to be sitting everybody down and talking about racism. If racism is a secondary consideration, or race awareness is a secondary consideration, you would think in a quote-unquote post-racial world that's a good thing, no? I don't know, just saying. The curriculum for excellence outcomes are broad and vague, which we understand is designed to promote the importance of teachers' autonomy. However, racism in the classroom must be dealt with in a specific and direct manner. Moreover, inclusion training. I mean, just fuck off. If in-service days are left to individual senior leadership teams' discretion, with promoted personnel not receiving regular, if any, additional race-specific training. Having experienced racial abuse from head teachers in the past, we have well-founded concerns that this issue is too easily being ignored by staff, amplifying the pain of children and young adults across our country. It's not your country, We understand that these changes would require financial support from the government in order to ensure effective implementation. We're also aware of the tangible long-term economic impacts of the so-called virus and the restraints that this will inevitably place on the government. However, we believe that this investment is not only owed by the government, it's not only owed, but is long overdue. Far too many people and adults in Scotland have experienced and continue to experience the consequences of the education system neglect of racial awareness. Jesus Christ. In addition, teaching unions such as the Education Institute Scotland and the Scottish Union Learning can help to facilitate and encourage these essential conversations and actions that need to be taken. The Curriculum for Excellence aims to build successful learners, confident individuals, responsible global citizens, by the way, with your sustainable learning, effective contributors. Effective contributors. It's just, they've completely destroyed the education system now. It's not worth going to school with. How can we hold our pupils to such standards when the government and education system are neglecting their duty to empower minority students and effectively tackle racism within our schools? So there's that, folks. Just thought I'd cover that. This is the sort of bollocks that they are trying so desperately hard to, implement into Scottish schools. It's just beyond the pale at this point. This anti-racist educator is by far the worst one, as I've said before. I mean, look at this fucking list of things. Race, racism, BME, person of colour, whiteness, white fragility, critical race theory, white supremacy, yada yada, xenophobia, reverse racism, and then they've got the wee resources here, the white privilege test. I mean, what, do we sit kids down and we talk to them about white privilege? We're often encouraged to believe that we live in a meritocracy where everyone is equal and treated the same. Whites ain't no at this point, are they? Anyway. Thought I'd say that. And on that note, peace.